The rope swayed in the cold wind, creaking against the wooden beam. Snowflakes drifted down in lazy spirals, melting on the raw pine of the gallows. The town square was silent, but for the rope's mournful groan and the crunch of boots on frost-hardened mud. Mara Wyatt stood at the platform's edge, wrists bound before her, belly rounded beneath her faded calico dress. 22 years old, and life already clung to her like a thread stretched too thin. Her face was pale from the cold, but her eyes, those stubborn blue eyes, still met the crowd without blinking. Sheriff Amos Hollis, a man built like a tree stump with a voice like gravel, stepped forward. "She's guilty," he declared, holding up a scrap of paper that was meant to pass as a charge. "Took bread from our own store. And we all know a crime's a crime." A murmur of agreement rolled through the onlookers. Men, women, even children, faces pinched with hunger. This winter had been hard, harder than most could remember. Someone had to be blamed for the gnawing emptiness in their bellies. The noose dangled inches from Mara's head. Noon. That was when the bell would toll and the trapdoor would fall. In the crowd, a lone figure leaned against the hitching post, shadow hiding most of his face. Weather-worn, unshaven, eyes narrowed on her like a man weighing more than just the law. Backstory interwoven with the present. Mara Wyatt had not always been the woman at the end of a rope. Once, she was a wife. Her husband, Samuel, worked the mines in the Black Elk Hills. Long days in the dark, lungs full of dust, but he came home with his arms around her and dreams in his voice. They'd saved for a small plot of land, a place to raise their child when the time came. But the mine collapsed in the spring thaw, and Samuel never came home. Mara stayed in the shack they'd built together, walls no thicker than her arm. Alone, she kept his coat hanging by the door, its scent fading with every passing storm. By December, the snow came hard and early. The trail west froze over. Supply wagons stopped coming. Flour ran out. Potatoes rotted in their bins. In the small town of Crossford, people began locking their doors, not from outlaws, but from neighbors. That morning, Mara had gone to the general store, her hands shaking from hunger. She had tried to ask for credit, just enough for bread, but Mr. Baines had laughed bitterly. "Credit don't fill shelves, Mrs. Wyatt. Come back with coin." Her belly cramped. She thought of the baby inside her, kicking faintly. She thought of Samuel's coat and the promises sewn into its seams. When Mr. Baines turned to fetch a crate, she slipped the loaf beneath her shawl. She almost made it out the door. Almost. Sheriff Hollis caught her on the boardwalk, bread in her arms, her eyes wide. The crowd that formed wasn't angry at her. They were angry at their own hunger, and she was just close enough to punish. No trial, just a declaration from Hollis. She'll swing tomorrow. Law's the law. In Hollis's mind, mercy bred weakness. He'd seen towns unravel when rules bent for special cases. A pregnant widow was no different than a drifter or a thief. The stranger by the hitching post hadn't looked away since. First attempt at escape. The deputy, a tall, nervous man named Carter, marched Mara toward the holding cell behind the sheriff's office. Snow hissed under their boots. The stranger stepped out from the alley, colliding with Carter's shoulder. "Watch yourself," Carter barked. "Sorry," the man muttered, keeping his head down. He was broad-shouldered under a battered oilskin coat, the smell of pine smoke clinging to him. For a moment, his hand brushed Mara's bound wrists. Something small and thin slid into her palm, a nail file, cold as ice. Carter shoved her inside the cell, locking the door. "Best get your prayers in," he said, not meeting her eyes. Mara sat on the cot, fingers curling around the file. She could almost hear Samuel's voice. "Run if you can, Mare. Always run." But the thought of running twisted her stomach. She was carrying more than herself now. If she fled into the cold, they'd track her. If she stumbled, The child inside her would suffer. That night, the wind screamed through the cracks in the walls. The file felt heavy in her hand. She worked at the lock until her wrists ached, but the old iron only groaned in defiance. She stopped, listened. Outside, the rope creaked again in the wind. Her breath came in slow, measured pulls. The fear was still there, but so was something else. Harder, sharper. Determination. Section closer. Morning light crept through the frost-rimmed window. The town square was alive with motion. The gallows being swept clear of snow, the noose adjusted for the day's grim work. Sheriff Hollis strode about like a man preparing for a celebration, not an execution. In a narrow alley across the way, the stranger, Silas Kane, watched from beneath the brim of his hat. His eyes flicked between the sheriff and the window of her cell. Inside, Mara stood by the bars, one hand pressed to her belly. She could feel the baby's slow, steady movement. Her inner voice was a whisper meant only for herself. If I die, my child dies with me. I can't let that happen. The church bell tolled once, deep and heavy. 1 hour to noon. 1 hour until the trapdoor fell. Mara's jaw tightened. The world had already taken her husband. It would not take her child. Somewhere beyond the bars, Silas's hand shifted to the knife on his belt. Flight through the white. The rescue. The gallows loomed above the square, its steps dusted in snow. Sheriff Hollis read the sentence aloud as if savoring every word. The crowd shivered, breath rising in pale clouds. Mara stood with the noose brushing her cheek. Her fingers were numb. The bell tolled the half-hour. Then shouts. Smoke bled into the air from the direction of the livery stable. A man came running down the street, waving his arms. Fire! Fire in the stables! Hollis snapped his head toward the smoke, cursed, and barked orders. Deputies broke into a run, the crowd splitting in confusion. From the corner of her eye, Mara saw him, Silas Kane, moving toward the gallows with a predator's calm. 2 swift cuts, and the rope fell away from her wrists. His grip clamped around her arm. Move, he hissed. They bolted down the steps, into the churned slush of the street. Hollis's voice roared behind them, down one alley, then another, narrow passages where snow melt mixed with mud. A frozen barrel overturned. A dog barked furiously. Mara's lungs burned. Her skirts caught on a nail, tearing. Silas yanked her free without slowing. The clang of boots echoed behind them. Through the last row of cabins, they burst into the open, past the last fence line, into the pale sprawl of the frozen forest. Branches heavy with snow swayed overhead. The town disappeared behind a curtain of white, conflict and distrust. They didn't stop until the square's noise was swallowed by the trees. Mara leaned against a pine, chest heaving. Why? She demanded. Why save me? Silas adjusted the rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes scanning the tree line. Didn't care for the look of that rope. That's it, she pressed. You don't even know me. His gaze flicked to her hands, curled protectively over her belly. Don't need to. The wind slid through the trees like a knife. Shadows lengthened. Snowflakes began to fall. Light at first, then thicker. Mara shivered, pulling her shawl tighter. You could have just walked away. I could have, he said simply, starting forward. She hesitated, then followed, her boots crunching in his tracks. The forest grew denser, quieter. Then low growls. Shapes moved between the trunks. Yellow eyes glinted. Wolves, Silas muttered. Her heart climbed into her throat. The pack fanned out, silent but for their breathing. Silas crouched, pulling flint and steel from his coat. He struck fast, sparks catching in a wad of pine needles. Smoke curled up and then flame. He waved the fire toward the wolves, the light dancing across their fur. One by one, they backed into the shadows, melting away. Mara's knees felt weak. "You'd be dead already without me," Silas said quietly, tossing another branch onto the small blaze. She hated that he was right. A shelter in the storm. The wind thickened into a blizzard. Snow stung Mara's cheeks like sand. Her legs ached. The cold gnawed through her dress. "Cabin up ahead," Silas called over his shoulder. Through the white haze, a dark shape emerged. A sagging log structure half buried in drifts. The door resisted until Silas threw his shoulder into it. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and old smoke. Snow had blown in through gaps in the logs. Silas set to work, striking flint. Soon, a small fire licked at the stones in the hearth. Mara crouched close, hands stretched toward the heat. Her dress steamed where the snow melted. After a long silence, she spoke. "Samuel, my husband, used to talk about a farm, apples, wheat, a place where we didn't have to answer to anyone." Silas poked the fire, eyes distant. "I had that once. Wife, too. She was with child. Got sick in the winter. The doctor wanted coin we didn't have. Sheriff said the law couldn't spare supplies for just one family." He didn't finish the story. He didn't need to. The flames crackled between them, warming the space, but not erasing the cold outside. Something softened in Mara's chest. Trust, fragile but growing. Section closer. Night pressed against the windows. The wind howled over the roof, rattling the shutters. Mara sat on the floor, back against the wall, eyes closed. For the first time in days, she felt warmth seep into her bones. Then, a distant sound. Hoofbeats, muffled but steady, carried on the wind. Silas's head snapped up. He crossed to the window, peering into the dark. Far down the slope, faint lanterns bobbed between the trees. "Sheriff's men," he said. "They've picked up our trail." Mara tightened her shawl. "How long until they're here?" "Not long enough. If they catch you, they'll kill us both." She met his eyes. "Then we keep moving." He studied her for a heartbeat, then nodded. At first light. Outside, the wind rose, swallowing the hoofbeats. The forest waited. The mountain crossing. Dawn broke pale and cold, the kind of light that felt brittle in the air. Silas led the way through the pines. Their branches bowed under fresh snow. The wind cut down from the peaks, carrying flecks of ice like tiny blades. They climbed higher, into the teeth of the high country. Snow blinded them, swirling so thick it erased the world beyond 10 paces. The trail beneath was slick, the rocks treacherous. Mara stumbled more than once, her breath coming ragged. She refused to say she couldn't go on, but her pace slowed. Finally, she faltered and went to her knees in the snow. Silas knelt beside her. "I'm slowing you down," she said, voice raw. "I've got nothing to give you, no money, no land, nothing but my will to keep breathing." He adjusted the strap on his rifle, then stooped and lifted her into his arms without a word. Her protests were lost in the wind. "That's enough," he said, his voice low but certain. The world narrowed to the crunch of his boots and the steady rhythm of his breath. Above them, the mountains loomed like walls of white stone, and somewhere beyond, danger was still on their trail. By mid-afternoon, the snow eased, revealing a narrow canyon ahead. The walls rose sheer on either side, streaked with ice. The only way forward, or back, was through. They were halfway in when Silas stopped, head turning toward the echo of hoofbeats. The posse, closer than he'd hoped. "Keep moving," he told her, his voice taut. Mara pressed forward, but glanced back as dark shapes emerged at the canyon's mouth. Sheriff Hollis and 3 deputies, rifles ready. Silas's eyes darted upward. Snow lay heavy on a ledge just above them, precarious. He swung his rifle off his shoulder, aimed high, and fired. The crack of the shot was swallowed by a roar, snow and ice shearing loose, thundering down the canyon wall. The avalanche slammed into the ground between them and the posse, sending up a spray of white. 2 deputies went down under the weight of it. The others scrambled back. Gunfire erupted, sharp flashes against the cold air. Bullets chipped rock, spat snow. Silas fired back, steady and precise, but a shot caught his side, spinning him half around. His rifle clattered to the snow. Mara's heart hammered. She dove for the fallen weapon, but found it too heavy. Instead, she grabbed the pistol at his belt. Hollis shouted from the far side, his face twisted in rage. The remaining deputy leveled his gun. Mara aimed and fired. Not to kill, but close enough that the shot tore into the snow by his boots. He flinched, cursed, and turned tail. When the gunfire faded, only Hollis remained, trapped beyond the wall of snow and ice. His voice carried over the wind. "You hear me, Kane? You hear me, girl? I'll find you both." Silas leaned heavily against the canyon wall, blood staining the snow at his feet. Mara dropped the pistol and caught him before he fell. Silas's weight was solid against her shoulder as they made their way out of the canyon. Each step felt stolen from fate. By dusk, they reached a hidden fold in the mountains, a small valley cupped in stone, shielded from the worst of the wind. Pines ringed the clearing, and a stream trickled faintly under a thin glaze of ice. Silas sank to his knees. Mara tore a strip from her skirt and bound his wound as best she could. Her hands trembled, but she worked fast. When the bleeding slowed, he looked toward the small rise where a cabin stood, a squat, weathered thing, its chimney leaning. "Built that a long time ago," he said, his voice thin. "Thought I'd come back to it someday. Guess that day's now." He shifted as if to stand. "You can have it. I won't be staying." Mara's hands froze. "Why not?" "Best not to be tied down. Not in my line of life." She studied his face, seeing past the hardness. "Stay. Not for me. For the child." The wind moved through the pines, soft as a whisper. Silas didn't speak, but after a long moment, he nodded once, slow and deliberate. Weeks later, the snow began to recede, revealing patches of brown earth. The stream ran stronger, carrying the sound of spring with it. Mara knelt in a small garden patch, pressing seeds into the thawed soil. Her belly was heavier now, the child moving with strength. Up on the roof, Silas hammered new shingles into place, pausing only to glance toward her. She caught his eye, and for a heartbeat, they both smiled. Her voice, soft and reflective, carried over the scene. "They left me for dead, left us for dead, but sometimes life gives you back more than it takes." The camera drifted upward, over the cabin, the valley, the mountains still capped in snow. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. Your support helps us bring more untold stories to life. Subscribe for the next chapter.